Alright everyone, let's talk about history. American education focuses way too much on its own short 200-year history with very skewed, over-patriotic themes, I might add. In my 12 years of public education, I only had one class called World History. And this is disappointing because there are a lot of interesting events that happen outside the United States. Shocking, I know, but hear me out. I am a dual citizen. My mother is American, but my father is Australian, and so am I. Therefore, I'm going to be focusing on one of the most insane moments in Australian history. It's called the 1975 Australian Constitutional Crisis, or more commonly, the Dismissal. Okay, I have to back up a bit at this point and explain some of the basics of Australian government. It's a two-party parliamentary government. The Labour Party is the rough equivalent of a Democrat, and the Liberal Party is the rough equivalent of a Republican. Labour, Democrat, Liberal, Republican. And yes, I see the irony in how that lines up. The Australians have an upper house and a lower house, a Senate and a House of Representatives, just like the United States. However, there is no executive branch in the Australian government. It's based on the Westminster system, which originated in the UK, where the leaders of the majority of the seats of the lower house become the leaders of the country, aka the Prime Minister of Australia. There is no executive branch in the Australian government. The main difference here is that the general public does not vote for their Prime Minister, the party does, and the party is entitled to change its leader at any point. They do not have to wait for another election cycle. In political terms, this is called a vote of no confidence. Australians also have a governor for their 7 states, and they are called premiers. Premier, governor, governor, premier. And have roughly the same powers except for a few which will become important in 1975. There's also a governor for the whole country called the Governor-General. Now, the Governor-General, for the most part, is a figurehead position. Often people with a stronger academic background rather than a political know-how get appointed. They mainly serve to boost PR development, sponsoring fundraisers and speaking at events. In the days before Australia was independent, the Governor-General was appointed by the King or Queen and served the English Crown as they watched over the limited Australian Parliament. By 1975, the Governor-General was appointed by the Prime Minister of Australia. But even though they are figureheads by that point, they still have the key power to dismiss Parliament. This means that if Parliament's not doing a good enough job, they can throw out everyone in the government and have a new election cycle for all the positions. In 1975, John Kerr was the Governor-General of Australia, appointed by the then Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam. Okay, so Gough Whitlam had been elected 3 times, and with each time his popularity was decreasing. Malcolm Fraser was the leader of the Liberals in the House of Representatives. Again, Liberals, Republican. And he was trying to make Whitlam look bad enough for the next election cycle. So, Malcolm Fraser was the head of the opposition, and he got enough votes to block the appropriations, which is the budget of the entire government, from getting through the lower house. However, the Senate was practically even with like 50% Labours and 50% Liberals, but Labour had like 1 vote to break all their ties, so the Labour technically just barely had the Senate. This meant that the bill to block supply could not be passed through the Senate, and making Whitlam look just a little bit better than Fraser wanted. And then something happened. On June 30th, 1975, Bertie Milliner, a Labour Party senator from Queensland, died. And this is sort of the Franz Ferdinand of the story, so to speak. See, in America, when a member of Congress dies, traditionally their spouse will fill in their seat until a special election can take place. But that's not what happened in Australia. In Australia, a temporary senator is appointed by the Premier, aka the governor of the state the senator represents, the state being Queensland. So, the Premier of Queensland at the time was Joe Bjelke-Petersen, and he decided to break this long-held tradition of a courtesy where the person who died is replaced by a member of their own party. So Joe Bjelke-Petersen, while not of official party, however, was more on the Liberal side. So what he did is, instead of replacing Milliner with a member of the Labour Party, he replaced him with Albert Field, who was known through interviews at the time as being very against Gough Whitlam. Now, the Labour Party was kind of shocked, so they sent them to court due to Field's lack of actual political credentials. But the court stand, and Albert Field was officially a member of the Australian Senate. Okay, so now the Liberals have a temporary majority in the Senate until the next special election. So because Field was appointed, Malcolm Fraser again tried to block the supply for the government funding as quickly as possible. It again made it through the lower house and was rushed to the upper house. Unlike his deceased predecessor, Milliner, Field cast a vote, and the appropriations bill was officially blocked in the Senate. Now, what this means is that the government is now shut down. No funding for government employees, schools are shut down, the military is closed, no one can get any passports, embassies aren't functioning, it's a mess. It's a really big deal. So, Fraser had effectively made the President Whitlam's popularity plummet. So, what's next? This lasted several days and crazy amounts of press and protests and uncertainty. Australia was in a really shaky time. Whitlam and Fraser both held their ground on which side they were on. So now, here's important. You remember the Governor General? His name was John Kerr. This guy. And he had decided that it had gotten so bad that he was now going to dissolve Parliament. And that would also make Gough Whitlam no longer the Prime Minister of Australia. However, you got to remember this. Whitlam appointed Kerr to the Governor-General position. So now we're sort of in an impasse. The Governor-General can dissolve Parliament, but the Prime Minister can still officially dismiss the Governor-General. So it's sort of at this even amount of power that's never really been explored before until this point. So, on November 11th, 1975, it was a race to decide who was going to dismiss whom first. You get the title yet? The dismissal? Yeah. So the Governor-General, John Kerr, had decided to dismiss the entire Parliament and appoint Malcolm Fraser as the interim Prime Minister until a general election could be held in a couple of weeks. As Kerr was completing the paperwork, he summoned Fraser to his residence in, Yarramulla. Yeah, that's the official place where the Governor-General stays. Then Whitlam caught wind of John Kerr's intentions. John Kerr didn't even tell him. And he immediately panicked and sent a car and a representative with the official paperwork to dismiss Kerr, now going to John Kerr's place. So, now it is boiled down to the point where there is now a literal car chase with Fraser in one car and Gough Whitlam's representative in another car, both going to Yarramulla to either make Fraser Prime Minister or dismiss Kerr and keeping Whitlam as Prime Minister. It's crazy. So, who got there first? That's the big question. And I know the suspense is killing you. In history, Malcolm Fraser arrived first and received the paperwork to become the interim Governor-General. By the time Whitlam's representative arrived, he no longer had the authority to dismiss Kerr and was no longer the Prime Minister of Australia. That's what happened. The elections were held a few weeks later. It was one of the greatest turnouts in Australian history, and the Liberals received a record victory, 91 seats in the House of Representatives to the Labour's 36 seats, and 35 seats in the Senate to the Labour's 27. They owned the government, so to speak. And despite blocking the appropriations in the first time, Malcolm Fraser was officially appointed not the interim, but the real Prime Minister of Australia, and held that position from 1975 to 1983. Whitlam remained the leader of the opposition, but was never officially elected into any higher position at that point. His career was just kind of, it was done. Kerr, while the re-election cycle was going place, resigned and was kind of kind of banished from the country. Everyone mostly blames Kerr for this whole thing taking place in the first place, because Kerr didn't even have the decency to tell Whitlam what his intentions was to dissolve the government. So it's kind of like a backstabbing move, because Whitlam appointed Kerr in the first place. It is also an interesting fact to note that Kerr technically still needed the Queen's signature in order to dissolve Parliament, which remained controversial because this is now the monarchy officially intervening in official Australian government's dealings. And the Queen chose to not interfere by not signing the document. She said, this is Kerr's decision, and she just signed it without saying anything to the press or anything to that effect. Despite all the trouble that this caused, the Constitution in Australia only received some mild policy changes as a result. The Governor-General to this day still has the power to dissolve government, and the Prime Minister still has the power to dismiss the Governor-General. So this evil leveling it's still there, so this could potentially happen in the future. Now, keep in mind this is a dense subject, and I'm only covering very basics of all the intervening factors between the two parties. If you found this subject interesting in any way, shape, or form, you can learn more by watching this Australian TV miniseries called The Dismissal that was aired in 1983. It was directed by George Miller from the Mad Max series, who currently has a movie out called Mad Max Fury Road, and it is considered the 19th best Australian television show according to 50 Years in 50 Shows list. I hope you enjoyed this topic, despite America not being the center of attention. There is a lot of great history in the world, and it would be a shame not to learn more about the most insane moments in our history. Thank you.